Welcome to Eye on Korea, a video podcast produced by the Korea Economic Institute of America. Join us for in-depth conversations with experts and policymakers as we explore issues in Korea's economic and political relationship with the United States and how these issues may influence South Korea's regional strategies and its global relationships. I'm Scott Snyder, President and CEO of the Korea Economic Institute, and today I'm joined by Jeff Schott. Jeff Schott has served as a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics for over 4 decades, working on international trade policy and economic sanctions. Schott was also a visiting lecturer at Princeton University and an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. Schott worked as an official of the U.S. Treasury Department in international trade and energy policy in the late 1970s and early 1980s. He previously was a member of the State Department's Advisory Committee on International Economic Policy and co-chaired the Trade and Environment Policy Advisory Committee for the U.S. Trade Representative. Jeff, welcome to Eye on Korea.
Thank you very much.
I just want to jump into the current environment in U.S.-Korea trade relations. And of course, right at this moment, a lot of Koreans are looking very carefully at the tariff framework that was agreed upon between the U.S. and Japan, because that executive order that President Trump signed achieves a reduction in auto tariffs to 15%. But there are also terms in that agreement that sound a little bit disadvantageous to Japan. While South Korea's framework of the Trump administration has not been finalized, leaving South Korean auto manufacturers vulnerable, at least for the time being, to tariffs on the order of 25%. I believe that Commerce Secretary Lutnick wants Korea to follow the Japanese pathway, but the two countries face differing circumstances. What is your view of the predicament that Korea faces, and what do you think is the best way out?
Well, you're right to use the term predicament because Korea needs to have good, strong, and steadfast relations with the United States for economic and for security reasons. But there is a challenge when the United States changes its policies, particularly in an area of trade where there has been a longstanding free trade agreement between our two countries for the past 13 years. So trying to navigate these rough waters has not been easy, but I think Korean officials recognize that this is something that they have to keep the overall relationship in its proper perspective. But it has been further complicated by the unfortunate incident in Georgia, which has made no sense to those of us in the United States who follow U.S.-Korea relations and don't know why this happened.
Well, I want to get into the Georgia situation, but before we do that, I want to just ask you, stepping back, to give your assessment of how Korea has adapted to what Jamieson Greer has called the Trump round in terms of international trade policy.
I wouldn't call it a Trump round. I would call it changes in U.S. policy and how you try to adapt, or not adapt, but respond to that, given the strong framework of economic relations that have been built up between our two countries. And it isn't easy because there have been particularly in the auto sector that you mentioned before, there has been a huge increase in U.S. tariffs, and that affects an area of where Korea is a substantial exporter to the U.S., and it affects tens of billions of dollars of Korean exports to the United States.
And you also mentioned that KORUS has really been, I guess, eviscerated under this new framework. Is there anything you think that South Korea can do in order to try to recover some of the key aspects of KORUS?
Well, I think KORUS still exists,
yeah.
And so I think the challenge is, how do you prevent deep and irreversible damage to the agreement while we navigate the current problems. And part of that will require looking at the agreement and seeing where it needs some updating. That's something that I know Korean officials are looking at, but it's also an area where you need to have it's a two-way street, and I'm not sure how much the Trump administration officials are into renegotiating agreements as opposed to just imposing new conditions.
Okay. Well, let's get back into the Hyundai raid impact. And clearly, this was a pretty shocking event where the immigration policy of the Trump administration clashed with its desire to onshore investment. And I think that the reverberations are still playing out in terms of impact on Korean public opinion. But what do you think are the really potentially long-term implications, especially for Korean investors as they look at this situation?
Well, of course, it raises questions because Korea has basically been committed to expanding investment in key sectors in the U.S. economy to build U.S. production facilities, which eventually will hire a lot of U.S. workers. But to get the plants up and running requires the skilled guidance of Korean workers and managers that are familiar with the advanced systems. And that was what was interrupted. And so I think there is a bit of a cloud that will have to be somewhat addressed, but I think it has created some ill will and some concern about what happens when you make these big commitments, and that will take some time to work itself out. And I'm hoping that we'll find a way to manage the problem. Now, there's been renewed discussion of short-term business visas to facilitate the activities that the Korean workers were engaged in, but the action and the treatment of the Korean employees have raised concerns that even if there is a new focus on short-term business visas, there still will be increased anxiety and reluctance to use them if they are available. So it's going to take a little time. These actions in Georgia created problems, and those problems will take some time to resolve.
Do you see that particular incident as playing into the tariff framework negotiations in any particular way? Does it give Korea an opportunity to push for a little bit greater leniency? How does it influence thinking regarding a framework for managing South Korean inward investment into the United States?
Well, the problem is that the U.S. policy isn't coordinated. The Korean policy seems to be pretty well coordinated and devoted to expanding activities in the U.S. And it's not just the Georgia issue. I mean, there was great hope that we could draw on Korean expertise in the shipbuilding sector. And indeed, that's a big area where the United States would benefit in both economic and security terms from having increased Korean participation in the investment in new U.S. facilities. But all of this sort of blowback from the Georgia incident just increases anxiety, increases reluctance to move too quickly until U.S. policy is better clarified and better coordinated. And the lack of coordination is something troubling. I know it's troubling for the people affected in Korea, but it's also troubling for us in the United States that see an administration's policies going in different directions at the same time.
Well, we're also dealing with something a little bit new, I guess, in terms of just the magnitude of these investment commitments, not only South Korea, but also Japan and the EU, and the uncertainty related to the mechanisms by which to manage those commitments and what it actually means between the governments. I wonder if you have some views about the uniqueness of the Trump administration's approach and what is the best strategy for counterpart governments in terms of grappling with these particular pressures to quantify numbers and then to define the details, the devil's in the details, as Trade Minister Yaw said.
Well, there is some confusion, and in part because a lot of things aren't either written down or available publicly for review and analysis. What is meant by investment and what type of instruments, whether they're loan guarantees or hard cash, there is some confusion about that, both with regard to Korean investments in the United States, some of which are readily evident as a result of the production facilities being built in Georgia and elsewhere. But also, this was a question and an area of confusion in U.S. talks with Japan. So I suspect that there's going to need to be a little more thorough review of the programs, and this is going to require a little more transparency in the administration's policies. But they don't want too much transparency until they get all their ducks in a row. And right now, the ducks are flying all over the place.
Well, I wonder if we can drill down a little bit on the shipbuilding in particular, since you mentioned that. And of course, we have a shipyard, Philly shipyard, purchased by Hanwha Ocean, so there's a base. But the $150 billion commitment, it seems like a pretty large number. And there's also the challenge of the capacity of U.S. shipyards compared to what Korea is able to do at home. How do you see that playing out in terms of actual implementation of the new acronym, MASGA?
Well, I think this is a natural area for deeper cooperation between our two countries because we have tied our hands behind our back in a way for the past 100 years with the Jones Act that has created restrictions on the use of non-U.S. ships in cabotage between in U.S. ports. And so that has also lessened our production capacity for both commercial and military vessels. And Korea is one of the leading countries in the world with the shipbuilding technology and production skills. And so having Korean investments in the U.S. Makes perfect sense because it is emblematic of the linkage of commercial and security interests that bind our two countries together. So I'm hoping that we move forward in this area, build on the investments that are already being made, and have it part of a enduring commitment and continuing commitment to work together, so that we in the United States can strengthen our production capacity, increase our fleet. And do it in a way that is world-class because we're using Korean expertise and technology.
Another sector that has gotten a lot of attention, at least in terms of the commitments, is related to LNG. And, that I think the premise behind that may be a little bit different. It also involves a potential investment in the Alaska pipeline. But I'm curious how you see the $100 billion of investment in LNG playing out.
Well, this is an area where, despite my previous background and role in U.S. energy policy, I'm not as well up to date as I used to be. There are a number of countries where the United States has talked about expanding production capacity to develop U.S. reserves, and I think this is an area where we can draw on Korean expertise to help build this, and perhaps some Korean financing. But I don't think it is as central to dealing with our current bilateral relationship as the shipbuilding and the auto issues that we now confront.
Well, hopefully the purchase of LNG tankers from Korea maybe can check both boxes somehow. I don't know. Wanted to ask you about an article by Dean Baker of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, which argues that Japan and South Korea should just pay the increased tariff rather than finance investments in areas largely directed by President Trump. Korean businesses have to weigh the costs of potential disadvantages or exclusion from the U.S. market if they consider that proposal. What's your take on the principles that the South Korean government should follow as related to managing the tariffs versus making investment commitments?
Well, if you don't manage the overall relationship, then the value of any investments you make is going to erode quickly. And from a Korean perspective, good economic relations has always been an important component of a strong foundation of bilateral relations and an essential component of our security relationship. So it is complicated, but it is essential that we still work together closely on these economic matters, but it's not going to help if we pursue investments and trade that lose money and are not sustainable. So I think the officials, Korean officials, are correct and not overreacting to the changes in U.S. policy, but recognizing that the costs, the short-term costs, need to be limited and replaced by some more enduring and secure and profitable economic and security relationship going forward. And it may be worth something to invest a little more to deepen the security relationship, particularly at this time. But that investment, if it's not sustainable, is not going to help security over time.
Now, I also want to ask you about the Korean investment situation in the context of the U.S.-China trade relationship. And of course, in many respects, tariffs and prohibitions on import of Chinese products are where many Korean investments are thriving in EVs and batteries. How do you regard the China factor, both in terms of the future direction of U.S. policy and in the event of a possible upcoming Trump-Xi meeting, perhaps even on the sidelines of APEC in South Korea next month?
Well, for economic and political reasons, Korea has to work with both the United States and China, and China is its biggest trading partner. But it also has to maintain good ties with members of ASEAN and its partners in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and which includes China. So I don't think it is a question for Korea of either or, going with the United States or going with China. It has to work constructively with both. But I think the United States is looking to have the same type of attitude because Trump realizes that China is an important consumer of U.S. products. And even while we put high tariffs on on a lot of Chinese goods, we can't do it to the extreme in which China reacts and says we're going to stop buying U.S. goods, particularly soybeans and other products. So I think what you're seeing with the Trump Xi Jinping discussions is that they're trying to find a way to prevent the relationship from being torn apart, because that would be damaging for both countries.
In addition to Korea's hosting of APEC, another multilateral trade arrangement that has come into focus in South Korea recently has been, I believe that Trade Minister Ya has mentioned the possibility of Korea maybe applying to join the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which, of course, the U.S. had a role in helping to set up, but then in the first administration decided to turn its back on it. What's your view of what South Korea might be able to gain in this particular context and moment from consideration of joining the CPTPP?
Well, I have been a strong supporter for many years for Korea working more closely together with the CPTPP countries. And there are now 12 countries. The United Kingdom joined last year. And there is now increased interest among the members of the European Union to work more closely with the CPTPP countries. And that provides an actually interesting opportunity for Korean officials. I think they realize the importance of having a very durable economic relationship with which also strengthens political relations with key countries in the Asia Pacific, many of which Korea already has a free trade agreement with. But then working with its free trade partner, the European Union, Korea could avoid being isolated, being 1 against 12. If Korea and the European Union sort of work together to build a bigger and better CPTPP, that may prove very constructive and make life a lot easier and avoid some of the pressure points that might otherwise be put on Korea. So the fact that the current Korean government is looking more favorably, or is at least exploring talks with the CPTPP at the same time that the European Union countries have been changing their policies and going in the exact same way, opens another great opportunity for coordination between Korea and the European Union to work for this bigger, better mega regional agreement.
No, it's very interesting, and I guess it'll take some time, and so we'll have to watch how that plays out. That's all the time that we have for today, but I want to thank you, Jeff, for joining us on Eye on Korea.
Well, thank you very much for having me. These are topics that I'm sure you're going to be discussing with many people in coming weeks. Very important for the crucial relationship between our countries and to ensure that it is stronger and more durable going forward.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us on Eye on Korea. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like the podcast, subscribe so you won't miss the next one, and leave a review to help others discover the show. Follow the Korea Economic Institute of America on social media or visit keia.org for more resources, events, and expert analysis on Korea. We'll see you next time on Eye on Korea.